The moment the delegate's hand closed around my daughter's wrist, every sound in the chamber disappeared for me except my own heartbeat. I am Daniel Ashworth, Ambassador of Earth to the Interstellar Council, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened that day. I have sat through 6 years of insults disguised as diplomacy. I have smiled while older species called my planet a nursery of savages. I have swallowed my pride so many times that I forgot what it tasted like to speak without measuring every word first. None of that mattered anymore. The second Counselor Vesk touched my daughter. Her name is Mira. She is 8 years old. She was sitting 3 seats behind me in the observation gallery, swinging her legs because they didn't reach the floor, drawing little pictures of the alien delegates on the back of a briefing folder because she thought their long necks were funny. She was there because Earth had insisted, as part of the new integration accord, that human families be allowed to accompany diplomatic staff on long postings. We had nothing to hide, my government said. Let them see we are not sending soldiers in suits. Let them see we are just people. That policy is the only reason my daughter was in that room, and it is the only reason the council found out, in the space of about 4 minutes, exactly what kind of species they had actually invited into their halls. It started over trade routes. It always starts over something small. The Vale Compact wanted access through a shipping lane that Earth had been given provisional control over during the last round of negotiations. Counselor Vesk, tall and pale gray, with a voice that vibrated the floor when he spoke, had been pushing the point for almost an hour. I kept my answers short, polite, firm. No. The lane was not open for renegotiation this cycle. No. Earth was not interested in a joint authority arrangement. No. We would not be moved by repeated requests dressed up as reasonable compromise. I have learned in 6 years among the stars that patience is a currency almost nobody else values the way humans do. Most of the old empires here settle disputes through pressure, escalation, veiled threats about resources or standing. It is how they have always done things. It works on each other because every one of those species has learned, over centuries, exactly where the other's limits sit. They know how far to push a Trellin before it lashes out. They know a Corvain will back down if you threaten its shipping insurance. They have a rulebook for everyone. They did not have a rulebook for us. And Vesk, frustrated that his usual tactics were getting nowhere, decided to write one on the spot. He turned from me, walked past the central table, and climbed the 3 low steps to the observation gallery before anyone, including the security officers standing along the wall, understood what he intended to do. I saw him move. I registered the direction he was walking, and some old, quiet part of my brain, the part that has nothing to do with diplomacy training or council protocol, understood before my conscious mind did, that he was walking toward my daughter. He reached down, he wrapped his long gray fingers around her small wrist, and lifted her from her seat, just enough that her feet left the floor, and he turned to face me with her held slightly in front of him like a piece of evidence. Perhaps, he said, in that low vibrating voice that carried through the whole chamber, the ambassador will find renewed interest in cooperation once he considers what a fragile thing a child can be, so far from home, surrounded by those who do not share his sentimentality. I want to describe what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it is important, and because I do not believe any council record captured it accurately. There was no fear. That surprised me later, when I had time to think about it. There should have been fear. My daughter was in the grip of a being twice my height, in a room full of strangers, on a station light years from anything resembling home. But what I felt instead was something colder and far more useful. It was clarity. Every unnecessary thought in my mind switched off at once, the way a house goes quiet when the power cuts, and what remained was simple and absolute. My daughter was not safe. That could not continue for 1 more second longer than necessary. I did not shout. I want to be clear about that, because I think the silence is what actually frightened the room, more than anger would have. I raised my hand, slow and open, the universal signal across a dozen species for wait, and I said, in a voice that came out far steadier than I expected, "Counselor Vesk, put her down. Right now. This is the only warning you will receive." He laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, not exactly. More the laugh of someone who genuinely believes he has already won, and is simply enjoying the last moment before the other side admits it. "Warning," he repeated, tasting the word like it amused him. "From a species with no fleet in this system, no standing army posted within 4 transit lanes, and a delegation of exactly 11 people on this station, I am curious what form this warning takes." I looked at him, and I said the truest thing I have ever said in that chamber. You misunderstand what you are holding. You think you are holding a bargaining chip. You are holding the one thing my species has never, in its entire history, been willing to let go of. Somewhere behind me, I heard one of the older delegates, a Thren representative named Solwyn who had worked with human traders for almost a decade, make a small sound. It was not quite a gasp. It was more like the sound someone makes when they suddenly remember something they had filed away as unimportant, and realize with a jolt that it was never unimportant at all. I did not know, in that exact second, what response Earth would send. I did not know the specifics. What I knew, with complete certainty, was that it would come, and that it would come fast, and that whatever calculations Vesk had made about the balance of power in that room were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. I want to take a moment here to explain something about my species that most of the Council did not understand yet, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. Humans are not the oldest civilization out here. We are not the strongest, not by raw numbers, not by fleet size, not by territory held. We arrived late to this table, and everyone at it has made a point of reminding us of that fact at every opportunity. But there is one thing evolution built into us over hundreds of thousands of years on a planet full of predators, long before we ever built a starship, and it has nothing to do with technology or military doctrine. It is the reflex to protect our young at any cost, without hesitation, without calculation of risk, without regard for consequence. It is older than our cities. It is older than our language. Every human institution, every emergency protocol, every defense treaty Earth has ever signed with itself or anyone else, is built on top of that reflex. Because no human government has ever been able to remove it, and frankly, none of them ever tried very hard. Because deep down, every single one of them shares it. So when Earth agreed to send families along with diplomatic postings, it was not an oversight. It was not naivety, the way some of the older species assumed. It came with conditions that were written into treaties nobody outside our government fully read, because the language was buried in appendices about consular staff welfare and emergency response timelines. Every diplomatic posting that included a minor was automatically assigned what our defense ministry called a proximity response asset. Most of the council had no idea what that phrase meant, because it had never once been triggered before that day. It was triggered the moment Vesk lifted my daughter off the floor. I did not see the message go out. I did not press a button or speak a code word. The system that tracked Mira's biometric signature, embedded quietly in a small bracelet she wore that everyone assumed was simple jewelry, registered a threat pattern the instant her heart rate spiked and her feet left solid ground while in the grip of an unidentified individual. It sent a single, silent alert across a network most of the council did not even know existed, straight to a vessel that had been sitting quietly at the edge of the system for 3 months, disguised in every scan as an unremarkable supply transport. It was not unremarkable. It was called the Ashen Reach, and it was built for exactly one purpose, which was to make sure that a threat against a human family serving off-world was answered before the council even finished debating what to do about it. I did not know all of this yet, standing in that chamber. What I did know was that my daughter's eyes had found mine, and that she was not crying. She was watching me the way children watch their parents in moments of danger, waiting to understand from my face whether this was truly serious, or whether it was something adults would sort out with words the way they always seem to. I gave her the smallest possible nod. Just enough. She understood it, the way she always has, better than I probably deserved. She went still, not frozen with fear, just still, the way I had taught her, without ever really meaning to teach her, simply by being her father for 8 years. "Counselor Vesk," I said again, and this time I let every ounce of the stillness inside me come through in my voice. "You have approximately 90 seconds to put my daughter down and step away from her, and I want you to use every one of them wisely." He hesitated. I saw it. For the first time since he had grabbed her, something flickered behind his pale eyes that had not been there before, something that looked almost like recalculation. "You have no forces here," he said, but the vibration in his voice had changed pitch slightly, and I do not think he noticed it himself. "I don't need forces here," I told him. "I need forces close enough to matter, and they already are." The station's proximity alarms began sounding 12 seconds later. I have replayed those 12 seconds in my mind more times than I can count since that day, and I still find them strange to describe, because so little happened in them, and yet everything that mattered happened in them. Vesk's grip on Mira's wrist loosened, just slightly, as if some instinct in him, some ancient predator sense buried under centuries of political sophistication, told him before his conscious mind did that something had shifted in the room. Solwyn, the Thren delegate, rose halfway from his seat, both of his lower arms pressed flat against the table, staring at the exit corridor as though he expected it to open at any second. 2 council security officers near the wall reached for communication devices at their collars, faces suddenly uncertain about whose orders they were meant to be following anymore. And then the lights along the station's outer viewport dimmed for exactly 1 second, the way lights do when a large amount of power is redirected somewhere else very quickly, and every screen in the chamber that displayed external sensor data flickered and refreshed with new information. The Ashen Reach had decloaked 400 meters off the station's primary docking ring. It did not fire on anything. It did not need to. It simply existed there, undeniable, close enough that every sensor operator on the station could see with perfect clarity that it had weapons capability far beyond anything registered for a supply vessel, and close enough that the response time between whatever happened next in that chamber and whatever happened next to the station itself had just been reduced to something measured in seconds rather than hours. Vesk let go of my daughter's wrist entirely. She dropped the short distance to the floor and landed the way children land, a little awkwardly, catching herself with one hand on the back of a chair, and then she did something that I think, more than anything else that happened that day, is the reason the story spread through council records the way it did. She looked up at Vesk, who towered over her, who moments earlier had been holding her by the wrist in front of an entire chamber of alien delegates, and she said, in the small, clear voice of an 8-year-old who had just decided she was not going to be scared anymore, "You should not have done that." Nobody in that room laughed. I think that surprised me more than the alarms had. I crossed the chamber in a handful of steps and knelt down beside her, checking her wrist, checking her face, and she looked at me and said, quietly, "Just for me, I knew you would come." I did not correct her. I did not explain that I had not, in fact, done anything at all except stand there and speak calmly, while a system I barely understood the details of did the actual work. In that moment, what mattered was that she was right to believe it, and that belief was worth more to both of us than the technical truth. Counselor Vesk stood very still, his long gray hands now empty at his sides, and I watched something happen to him that I had genuinely never expected to witness in 6 years of diplomatic service. He looked afraid. Not of me, not of my daughter. Of the sheer scale of the miscalculation he had just made, a miscalculation that every screen in the chamber was now displaying in cold, undeniable sensor data. I stood back up, keeping one hand resting lightly on Mira's shoulder, and I addressed the chamber, not just Vesk, because I understood by then that this moment was no longer about one delegate's mistake. It was about an entire assumption the council had built about my species, an assumption that had just been proven false in front of everyone who mattered. "I want to say something plainly," I began, "because I do not think it has ever been said plainly in this chamber before. Every human government on Earth, regardless of history, regardless of disagreement, regardless of politics, has one thing in common, that no treaty has ever changed, and no treaty ever will. We do not negotiate the safety of our children, not for trade routes, not for territory, not for standing in a council we only recently earned the right to sit in. You may threaten our resources, you may threaten our position, you may disagree with every policy we bring to this table, and we will sit here and argue it out with you for as long as it takes, because that is what diplomacy is for. But the moment you threaten one of our children, you are no longer negotiating with a diplomat. You are negotiating with every single human being who has ever loved a child enough to burn down the world for them, and I promise you, that is a very long list." The chamber was silent. Even the ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade into the background of that silence. Solwyn, the Thren delegate, was the one who finally spoke, and I have never forgotten what he said, because it told me something about how the older species truly viewed us, something we had never been told directly before that day. "We had heard rumors," he said slowly, "traders' stories, mostly, about response times near human colonies, whenever a child went missing or was placed in danger. We assumed exaggeration. Species tell stories about themselves that grow larger with each telling. I see now we should have asked more carefully before assuming which stories were exaggerated and which were simply true." Vesk's own government contacted the council station less than an hour later. I was not present for that conversation, but I was told, by 3 separate sources over the following days, that the message opened with an apology so immediate and so thorough that it bordered on desperate, and that it included an offer to withdraw Vesk from all future council proceedings and issue a formal condemnation of his conduct before Earth had even filed a complaint. They understood, faster than almost anyone else in that chamber, exactly what they were dealing with, because their scouts had apparently studied Earth's military history in some detail, and they knew precisely what happened to threats against human children in every recorded conflict in our past, going back long before we ever left our own solar system. I did not gloat. I want that understood clearly, because I think it would be easy to tell this story as one of triumph, of a species finally putting arrogant aliens in their place, and while there is truth in that, it is not the part of the story that matters most to me. What matters most to me is what happened 3 days later. when the council reconvened, and a new item had been added quietly to the standing procedural notes distributed to every delegation. It stated, in careful bureaucratic language, that any threat, implied or direct, made toward a minor accompanying any delegation, of any species, would be treated as an immediate and non-negotiable breach of council conduct, subject to review and expulsion. Every species on the council had, at some point in the following weeks, added a private note to their own internal files about humanity, and I saw a version of one of those notes much later, shared with me quietly by an ally in another delegation, and it said simply, "Do not, under any circumstance, use a human child as leverage, regardless of the apparent tactical opportunity. The response will exceed any reasonable calculation of proportional consequence." I think about that sentence often. I think it captures something true about us that even I had not fully understood until I watched it happen with my own eyes, standing in that chamber with my hand on my daughter's shoulder. We are not the oldest species out here. We are not the strongest, not by the old measurements the Council has always used to rank power among the stars. But there is a kind of strength that does not come from fleet size or territory or centuries of political maneuvering. It comes from something far older and far simpler, something every human carries whether they ever leave their home planet or not. It is the certainty that no cost is too high when it comes to protecting a child, and the willingness to prove that certainty instantly, without hesitation, without a single second wasted on calculating whether it was wise. Mira asked me that night, back in our quarters, sitting on the edge of her bed while I checked her wrist one more time even though there was nothing left to see, whether she had been brave. I told her the truth. I told her that bravery was not about being unafraid. It was about staying steady when it mattered, and that she had done exactly that, better than most adults I had known in that chamber that day. She smiled at that, the way children smile when they are proud of themselves but trying not to show it too much. And then she asked me something else, something that I think, more than anything Vesk said or the Council recorded, stayed with me longest. She asked if the tall gray man would try again. I told her no. I told her that everyone on that station now understood something they had not understood before, and that understanding would follow us to every corner of this new, strange, wide universe we had only just begun to step into. I told her that the Council had learned, in the space of a single afternoon, a lesson that no treaty could have taught them, and no diplomat could have explained in words alone, a lesson that would outlast every trade dispute and territorial disagreement that would ever come after it. They had learned exactly what happens when you threaten a human child, and I do not believe, for as long as humanity sits at that table, that any of them will ever need to learn it twice.